On November 30th, 1965, a little-known 31-year-old American lawyer named Ralph Nader published a book that detonated like a bomb in the city of Detroit, Michigan, which was then the car manufacturing capital of the world. The book was called Unsafe at Any Speed. And it did something that no one had dared to do before. It exposed the US automobile manufacturing industry for knowingly building dangerous cars. Nader zeroed in on the Chevrolet Corvair, beautiful little car which had a tendency to spin out and roll over because of its flawed suspension design. But he didn't stop there. He actually documented how the wider auto industry was prioritizing profits and style over human lives, how they were resisting safety regulation, how they were blaming car accidents on the nut behind the wheel, the driver. Now, what was the response? Well, the car industry actually hired private investigators to follow Nader. They tapped his phone. They even tried to entrap him with women. Fortunately, that all backfired spectacularly. And 9 months later, US President Lyndon B. Johnson signed into law the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act. Cars got mandatory seatbelts and shatterproof glass and anti-lock brakes and airbags and padded dashboards and safer fuel tanks. The result? A 75% drop in traffic fatalities over the next few decades, all because one person dared to say, this isn't safe and we can fix it. Now, what does this have to do with the future of cybersecurity? Well, of course, everything. Just like those 1960s cars, the digital devices that power our modern lives are full of preventable design flaws. Instead of steering wheels that impale drivers, we have software vulnerabilities that allow ransomware to paralyze hospitals. Instead of blaming the nut behind the wheel, we blame the user that clicked the link. And just like the auto industry insisted that safety regulation would kill innovation, we have software vendors that continue to resist building security into their products from the very beginning. It's time for a shift, just like the one that Ralph Nader sparked, because right now, our digital world is unsafe at any CPU speed. Now, before we talk about how we can catalyze a safer and more secure technology ecosystem, I want to take a step back. And I want to talk about how we got here. And really, it is the wider story of cybersecurity. It's a story we've been writing for quite some time, and it's a story in which we are all characters. And frankly, it's a story at its crisis point. That point where we can change the trajectory of the story for better or for worse. So let's start out with our first set of characters. The villains. These are hooded strangers operating mysteriously in the shadows. They're nation-state hackers and cyber criminals who steal our data, lock it up for ransom, try and disrupt our critical services, but yet we give them names that imply power and charisma. They are Fancy Bear, Scattered Spider, Nemesis Kitten, Midnight Blizzard, Volt Typhoon, the Lazarus Group. We don't, unfortunately, call them Scrawny Nuisance, or Weak Weasel, or Feeble Ferret, or my favorite, Doofus Dingo. No, we talk about them almost in hushed tones of awe. They are advanced persistent threats. They use sophisticated exploits or the dreaded 0 day. Sometimes it feels like the message is,
you, mere mortal, you are no match for these powerful villains alone.
Yeah. But let's be clear. These villains are just that. They are villains. They were evil yesterday, they are evil today, and they will be evil tomorrow. And while a few of them do invest resources to create novel exploits, the vast majority of the time they are just taking advantage of the same old technology product defects. These villains do not have superpowers, and we shouldn't treat them like they do, but yet we do. We kind of glamorize the villains, and what's worse, we actually vilify our second set of characters. The victims. In a strange twist of fate, we actually place responsibility for security at the feet of those who, while not entirely blameless, are probably the least responsible character in this story. When an organization gets hacked, we scream, if they had only implemented the basic security protections.
How could they?
So victims get re-victimized in the aftermath of an attack. They get named, they get shamed, they get blamed for failing to update their software, for not enrolling their employees in multi-factor authentication. And when a ransomware attack occurs, sometimes we're quick to say, it's because of that employee that downloaded the malicious file or got phished into giving up their password. But let's just be clear. Human error can only ever be the starting point for an investigation, never its conclusion. It is the proximate cause of an incident, not the root cause.
Say it again, say it again, say it again.
All right, I will. Human error can only ever be the starting point for an investigation, never its conclusion. It is the proximate cause of an incident, not the root cause. Now, to get to that root cause, we have to set aside our villains and our victims and talk about our third set of characters. The vendors. Now, I am talking about the technology vendors that create the software that powers our modern lives, the software that underpins the critical infrastructure that we rely upon every hour of every day for power and water and healthcare and finance and transportation and communications. Yeah, those vendors arguably created the cybersecurity industry. We have a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity industry because for decades, technology vendors have been allowed to develop and deliver flawed, insecure, defective software that prioritizes speed to market and features and driving down cost over security, thereby requiring bolt-on cybersecurity solutions. And we, the customers, we've actually allowed this unwittingly. We've actually normalized it because we've bought into the myth of software vulnerabilities as unpredictable act of nature. It's like a hurricane or a typhoon or a flood. We are powerless to prevent these inevitable acts of God. All we can do is just try and respond as rapidly as possible.
Clean up on aisle 9.
But that's not right. Frankly, it's bullshit. In 2007, the MITRE Corporation of MITRE Attack Framework fame published a white paper. It was called Unforgivable Vulnerabilities, and it laid out criteria for classes of defect that should be considered unforgivable for being both easily found and easily exploited. These were defects that showed that developers didn't consider security at all. MITRE called these canaries in a coal mine, beacons of systematic disregard for secure development practices, products with vulnerabilities that never should have seen the light of day. Now, what do you think was at the top of this list of unforgivable vulnerabilities? Well, it was memory safety violations and coding weaknesses leading to cross-site scripting, SQL injection, directory traversal. Now, 16 years later, in 2023, MITRE published a follow-up white paper. This one was called Stubborn Weaknesses. And what do you think was at the top of this list of vulnerabilities? Memory safety violations and other coding weaknesses leading to cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and directory traversal. 16 years, and really 18 years later, we are still making the same mistakes. Ask yourself, in what other industry would this be allowed? And just to reinforce the point, the vulnerabilities on these lists were not jaw-dropping innovations. They were not the product of hundreds of elite researchers spending hundreds of millions of dollars. No. They were the golden oldies. The golden oldies, the same vulnerabilities that we've known about for decades and that we've known how to solve at scale basically for years. We wouldn't accept these types of lingering defects in any other industry. Why are we so complacent when it comes to our software? Well, the truth is, my friends, it's the technology vendors that are creating the products that open the doors for villains to attack victims, and we really just have to acknowledge that. You know, instead of using terms like vulnerability, which really diffuses responsibility, we should use terms like product defect, because that names the problem much more directly, and it highlights the need for software vendors to develop and deploy and deliver software specifically focused on driving down the number of exploitable flaws. And instead of blaming the user for failing to patch their software or failing to have good password hygiene, why don't we ask why the underlying technology was so defective, why it needed so many urgent patches? You know, the truth is, we have to demand more. We have to demand more of the technology vendors, and we have to demand more of ourselves as the customers. Because despite the amazing, amazing, amazing work that we have done, our community, the cybersecurity community, we still have a multi-trillion-dollar cybercrime problem. Yeah, much like the 1960s auto industry, we've spent the past many decades prioritizing speed to market and cool features and cost and convenience over security, and we've essentially built a fundamentally insecure digital infrastructure. And as I alluded to, the costs, the consequences are really staggering. We have now a cyber attack roughly every 30 seconds. The average data breach costs over $5 million, with some costing into the billions, and global cybercrime damages are expected to cost the world $10.5 trillion by the end of this year. That is the gross domestic product of Japan, India, and Italy combined, or 35 times the gross domestic product of Finland. And still, much like that auto industry of the 1960s, the technology industry continues to blame users for clicking on the link, for not patching their software, for failing to have good password hygiene.
How could they?
So the question is, why is this allowed to occur? Like most things in life, it actually comes down to economics. Misaligned incentives and the nature of software as what economists refer to as a credence good. So now for a quick commercial break for some Econ 101. 3 types of goods. The first type of good is what's called a search good. Now, search goods, you can actually determine the quality of that good before you purchase it. Like my awesome jeans. I saw them in a store. I went in, I felt the material, I tried them on, I walked around in them, I bought them. My favorite pair of jeans. Excellent quality, and I knew that before I purchased them. Now, the second type of good is what's called an experience good. Now, experience goods, you can't actually determine the quality until after you purchase. So, for example, a trip to beautiful Helsinki, Finland. I can research it, I can read the reviews, I can find out that Finland is the happiest country on the face of the earth. But I really have to come here. I have to experience the people and the food and the cultures and the saunas to decide fantastic quality. Great trip to Helsinki. Now, the last type of good is what you call a credence good. Now, credence goods, you can't actually determine the quality before you purchase them or even after you purchase them. And software security is a quintessential credence good. You can't really look at the software before you purchase it and say, good quality security. And then after you purchase it and are using that software, you may not know it's secure until somebody asks you to pony up some Bitcoin to get your data unlocked. So here we have a market failure. Customers can't determine the quality of the product before they purchase it, or even after they purchase it. So vendors are really not rewarded or incentivized to invest in security. They are rewarded to invest in getting that product to market first and features and driving down the cost and convenience all over security. So essentially, the market has disincentivized security. And so if a company has to make a decision about whether they get that product to market on time with known security flaws or actually hold back on getting the product to market and fix those flaws, typically the decision will be get that product to market and then the users will patch that vulnerability. And then if there's a breach or an incident, well, it was the user's fault for not patching the vulnerability.
How could they?
Yeah. So now, why is that allowed to happen? Well, typically when you have a market failure, the government steps in with regulation to protect customers. But just like the auto industry of the 1960s, that insisted that safety regulations would kill innovation, we have the technology industry that spent decades and billions of dollars lobbying against security regulations, saying that it would kill innovation, saying that software vulnerabilities are just the cost of doing business in today's modern digital world. I mean, just look at this actual contract language for when you purchase software.
Software and our affiliates, resellers, distributors, and vendors make no warranties, express or implied, guarantees or conditions with respect to your use of the services. You understand that use of the services is at your own risk and that we provide the services on an as-is basis with all faults and as available. You bear the entire risk of using the services.
Sign right here.
The entire risk. Would you buy a car entirely at your own risk? Would you get on an airplane entirely at your own risk? And yet, we do this with the software that we rely upon every hour of every day. The entire burden is borne by the user. Sadly, my friends, we have fallen prey to the myth of techno-exceptionalism.
We are smart. We know more than you. Tech is very, very complicated. We have nothing to learn from the worlds of automotive safety, the aviation industry, or medical safety. They are different. Our technology moves too fast. We are not affected by the universal forces that affect all other industries. We have never measured the cost of secure software, but we can assure you that it would absolutely, positively cost too much. We just know it as an immutable truth. So please, Stop bothering us and let us go back to our very complicated and important work.
God. So, what do we do? What do we do? Do we give up?
No.
Thank you for that audience participation. Do we give up?
No.
Do we let the villains win?
No.
Do we accept that we're all just victims?
No.
Do we let the vendors off the hook? Come on, my friends. Do we accept that software vulnerabilities are just the cost of doing business in today's modern digital world?
No.
Thank you. No, no, no is the right answer. We can't. We won't. Look, I have a dream of a world where ransomware is a shocking anomaly. A world where software vulnerabilities are as infrequent as plane collisions. A world where cybersecurity is as obsolete as the beeper.
Cybersecurity? We don't need no stinking cybersecurity.
Okay, I'm kidding, right? Mostly. We all have job security for quite a long time, but I do believe we can make it much harder and much less lucrative on the villains, on our adversaries. It's a really tough problem, but it's not an impossible one. We actually got ourselves into this mess, and we can get ourselves out. We just need a shared vision. And you know what? It is not rocket science. Because the truth is, my friends, we don't have a cybersecurity problem. We have a software quality problem. We don't need more security products. We need more secure products.
Say it again. Say it again. Say it again.
We don't have a cybersecurity problem. We have a software quality problem. We don't need more security products. We need more secure products. Just as Ralph Nader was daring to catalyze a movement where cars were built with safety from the ground up, we can dare to catalyze a movement where software is built with security as the top priority, secure by design. Now, when I was at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, we actually launched the Secure by Design campaign specifically for this purpose. It laid out a bold vision where software was built to be resistant to the most common types of attacks. And over the past several years, the movement gained real traction, joined by many partners from around the world, many who are in this room, and by over 300 technology vendors who willingly, voluntarily signed the Secure by Design pledge, making commitments to making material progress towards key Secure by Design areas, like increasing the use of multi-factor authentication, decreasing use of default passwords, and removing entirely classes of vulnerabilities, like those memory safety violations and coding weaknesses that led to cross-site scripting and SQL injection. Yeah. And very excitingly, right here in Europe, with the Cyber Resilience Act and the NIS2 directive, the EU is actually leading the world in turning Secure by Design from a grand ambition to a legal requirement. But now is the time for us all to play a role. Now is the time for us to become the last set of characters, the heroic characters. The visionaries. The visionaries who challenge the status quo so that we get safer and more secure software and technology products. The visionaries that champion development frameworks that make secure coding the path of least resistance. Coders out there, just imagine you are about to create an unforgivable vulnerability, and your development environment says to you,
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
But as I said, now it is time for all of us to play our role. So software vendors out there, and many of you are probably already doing this, embrace secure by design principles. Not only is it the right thing to do for your customers, but under the Cyber Resilience Act, it's the law. So design and test and deliver products specifically focused on driving down the number of exploitable flaws. 2, academics, professors out there, integrate security principles into your software engineering curriculum, into your computer science curriculum. Make sure that your students understand the security risks of coding in C and C++. And while we're at it, let's just say bye-bye to C and C++ and say hello to Rust and other memory-safe languages. 3, regulators, policymakers, as I said, the EU is already paving the way with the Cyber Resilience Act and the NIS2 directive, but now's the hard part. Implementation and enforcement. They can't just be applied on paper, it has to be enforced with teeth. And for those of us from other countries around the world, including and especially the United States of America, we have to continue to drive for the implementation, the establishment of a software liability regime, one that is rooted in an articulable standard of care, and one that has safe harbor provisions for those vendors that do responsibly innovate by using secure development practices. 4, investors, venture capital folks out there. Make sure that you are seeing security as a proxy for long-term company viability. Invest in those technology founders who do embrace secure coding. And while you're at it, let's make some big bets on generative AI technologies that will help us refactor legacy code at scale to memory-safe code. Finally, users and customers of software. Anybody who buys, acquires, procures, and deploys software, which is basically all of us, we need to call for software that is much more secure. We need to turn secure by design into secure by demand. Anybody in a company, anybody at levels of corporate leadership, CEOs and boards, use your purchasing power. Drive a more secure technology system by voting with your procurement dollars. When I was at CISA, we actually released a software secure by demand guide for software customers with specific questions that organizations can ask to overcome that credence good problem that I talked about earlier, to be able to talk to technology vendors and understand how they are integrating secure coding into their products. And just this past January, CISA teamed up with the European Commission, DG Connect, to come up with a software secure by demand guide for operational technology software. So specifically, those industrial control and automation systems that underpin some of our most sensitive critical infrastructure. And then in the category of awesome, in April, just last month, my good friend Pat Opet, who's the Global Chief Information Security Officer for JP Morgan Chase, largest bank in the world, he actually published an open letter to software suppliers. He said that the modern software as a service delivery model is actually enabling cyber attackers and weakening the global economic system. He called for software suppliers to prioritize security over rushing features to market and to build comprehensive security into products from the ground up. Now, when you have the biggest bank in the world calling for more secure products and software and willing to put their money where their mouth is, their purchasing power, we start to see some real change in shaping the technology ecosystem for the better. So as I said, we are starting to see some real momentum. But now is the time for all of us as visionaries to take advantage and seize this opportunity. We need to recast the villains, recast the victims, demand more from our vendors, and to become those heroic visionaries who help to shape that technology ecosystem, just as Ralph Nader was able to rewrite the story of automotive security. We can come together to rewrite the story of cybersecurity to a world where clicking on a link isn't a gamble with patients' lives. A world where software vulnerabilities are so rare, we discuss them we see them on the nightly news, not at the morning meeting. A world where cybercrime is a shocking anomaly. A world where we are not just safe at any CPU speed, but at every CPU speed. Together, we can make this happen. So let's go. Thank you.